So today I want to talk about somatic approaches and why they're so important, especially when we're doing trauma work. So first, let me explain the difference between a cognitive approach and a somatic approach. A cognitive approach actually deals with our thoughts. So cognitions are thoughts, okay? So this is what we usually know as talk therapy. You go to therapy, you talk to the therapist gives you information, and that information and tools help you see things in a different way. Somatic approaches involved our body and actually paying attention to what is happening to our body and processing experiences that happened and like energy that gets stuck in our body from experiences that we lived through. Now, with a cognitive approach, this approach is actually very successful for a lot of people. You talk about things and you start seeing things in a different light once you start understanding them differently. But some people feel like they get stuck. So what you will usually hear is that people say, like, I know logically that I'm supposed to do this and I have all the information, but then my body cannot seem to do what I know I need to do. And this is when we usually know that there's something in the body that hasn't been processed. So let me explain when I say process and when I say that experiences haven't been processed, let me explain how that happens. When we have an experience, right? And that experience causes a lot of emotions. Those emotions will cause a lot of energy, a lot of body sensations, which we are usually not aware of because we're not attuned to our body. We're not used to it, right? So if in that experience, after that experience happened, we weren't able to process it by talking to someone or by doing something to feel safe again. And sometimes there can be experiences where it can be really, really hard to feel safe after the experience, even if it's sometime after. Then all of the energy from that incident gets stuck in our body. The way that we know when we have memories that haven't been processed, if we can think back to that experience and still feel really intense emotions around it. Another way is through flashbacks. Flashbacks is actually the way our body is attempting to complete a memory and process a memory, but it can't do it. So it's kind of like just stuck. And again, we will feel a lot of intense emotions, right? So sometimes people adapt the best way that they can, and sometimes it's just by trying to avoid it or ignore it. But that also doesn't seem to help. It might help in the short term, but not in the long run. Like what was happening, or that the sense, how we make sense of the experience still stayed in our body. Okay, so what are somatic approaches, or what are different types, and what do they do? So there are different types of approaches and there's no best fit. I mean, honestly, like it's better to try different ones and see which one you like best. Sometimes I feel like some experiences process better with some approaches than they do with others. I don't think there's one that's superior to another. If you go on Google, just Google somatic approaches, you'll probably get a list of different approaches. The ones that are very common are somatic experiencing, EMDR, brain spotting, sensory motor therapy, craniosacral therapy, if I said it correctly, neurofeedback. So all of these approaches have very similar components that help people process the events. What usually happens with these approaches is that you either go back to the memory, which I know that a lot of people don't want this part because they've been trying to avoid feeling or thinking about this, right? And This time is different though. So I want to reassure you that even though you might feel some intensity, the intensity will probably not be the same. And if it is similar, it won't be for too long, because when you're using a somatic approach, you're actually processing the experience, and you will notice in session that at the beginning it was really strong, and then you will notice how it decreases. So when a therapist does a somatic approach, what they do is they either recall the memory, or it might be that you say like, you know what, I don't like that like this part of my personality, or I don't like how I react to like in my relationship or to certain situations. And that's where we'll start. Depending on the therapist and the approach that it's used, we will just gather information about what you want to work on and then start working on it. And when we do a session, we will ask you to notice what's happening with your body and to allow anything that is going to happen to take place. So just allow any sensations, any thoughts, any meaning that you make of things, any memories, anything, like wherever your body takes you, just allow it. And what will start happening is that your brain will start making connections. I don't know if you've heard, but neurons that fire together, wire together, and this is actually how we create neural pathways in our brain. And this is what happened usually earlier in our experiences, that we created neural pathways in our brain, and how we viewed life, relationships, and experiences now is because of these neural pathways that were created. So when you're doing somatic approaches, you're actually doing the same thing in your brain. Your neurons are firing, and you're making sense of things in a different way, and you're processing things in a different way, because now you're in a safe place in front of somebody who's safe, who's guiding you, and who knows how to bring you back to safety. After your neural connections, after you create new neural connections, things in your body won't feel as intense. And what happens during these sessions is that you might notice sensations, like a lot of sensations. You might notice like memories that come up. You might notice that you start seeing things different, or as you're processing, you're remembering things that you didn't remember before. These techniques are not meant to retrieve memories that you've forgotten. Usually you become aware of them, where areas you might have not consciously remembered them, if that makes sense. So what people report is that usually after they do somatic approaches, they don't feel the emotions as intense. So if you're remembering, for example, like a really traumatic situation that happened at the beginning of the session, it was like a 10, like on a 0 to 10 scale, and you felt a lot of fear. By the end of the session, you might be feeling an intensity of a 5 on that same scale. Or some people even complete memories on just one session. What then happens is that we start to notice that our reactions are not as strong, because we process that energy that was stored in our body. Obviously, this is not like a miracle cure. It's just a tool that we use in therapy to see results quicker, and also to do something that we cannot do when we're just thinking about things, because when we're only doing cognitive approaches and we're not integrating the body, we're actually, how do I explain this? When like the parts of our brain that are active when we're thinking about things are not the same parts of our brains that are active when we're feeling things and noticing things. So when we integrate the body, we are working basically with the whole, like our brain is wiring all across, not just on our memory, like on our analytical brain or thinking brain. So anyway, if You can work with somebody who does somatic approaches. I would really encourage you to try them because I have a feeling that you're going to notice a difference, and the progress that you make is going to be like night and day. Now, it's really important to find a therapist with whom you feel safe, because the approach is only as meaningful as the person who is doing it. Remember that in trauma work, it's really important for you to feel safe. And I mean, really in any type of therapy, right? But especially in trauma therapy, because trauma work, or when we experience a lot of traumatic situations, it left us feeling unsafe. So the last place we want to feel unsafe is when we're doing therapy. So if you have tried somatic approaches in the past and you haven't found them effective, check to see if you felt safe when you were doing them. If maybe it was too much for you at the time, if you didn't feel like you were doing it right, because that's actually something that's super common with people, because when they start paying attention to their body, sometimes they can feel like they're doing it wrong. If they have like a perfectionistic traits, right? Like they often feel like they're messing up and they're judging themselves all the time. They might feel like they're doing somatic experiencing work or somatic work wrong. So just some things to check out for. I hope that you found this helpful. Please leave any questions that you have in the comments and I will try to answer them as soon as I can. So take care and I'll see you next week.